Hello, good morning everyone. How are you all? Good. Okay. So in this today's class we'll be discussing about biodiversity and conservation, right? So if we talk about biodiversity, it is a combination of two words. Bio, that means living organism, or you can say life, right? And variations. So as a whole we can say that it is basically the degree of variations of life. When there are variations in living organism, we call it biodiversity, right? You can see around yourself, around your surroundings, that there are so many species, so many living organisms, right? So it is not possible to keep on telling there are many organisms like that. As a whole we will call it as a biodiversity, right? And biodiversity refers to the variety and number of living organisms. So basically biodiversity refers what? It refers to the variety and number of living organisms, both animals and plants in the ecosystem, right? So biodiversity is basically the variety and number of living organisms, both animals and plants in the ecosystem. It is not only specific to animals, it includes both animals and plants, different kind of animals and plants that are included in the ecosystem, right? So that is biodiversity. Coming to the term biodiversity was given by Raymond F. Desmond. This question may come for 1 mark. So this is important for short-term questions, right? So the term biological diversity is given by Raymond F. Desmond, right? If we talk about the levels of biodiversity, there are basically three levels of biodiversity. One is your genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity, right? So if we talk about the levels of biodiversity, they are classified into three types, three levels, right? Basically genetic diversity, species diversity, and then your ecosystem diversity. Coming to genetic diversity means variations, right? And genetic means gene composition, right? Genes composition. So genetic diversity basically refers to the different genes and combinations of genes. It refers to different genes and combination of genes that exist within the population, right? So that is what we call genetic diversity. It is basically the different genes and combination of genes within the population. So now suppose you can also say that so many you can say organisms are there, right? Out of those only 1-2% similarity is there in case of twins. Rest all are different from each other, right? This difference is due to their gene composition, right? So that is what we call genetic diversity. Genetic diversity refers to the total, this is important, it refers to the total number of genetic characteristics in the genetic makeup of species, right? So whatever the gene makeup of an organism, that we considered as genetic characteristics, and that is very much different from individuals to individuals, and that we call genetic diversity, right? Genetic characteristics are the traits we inherit from our parents. Now from where does this genetic characteristics comes from? These are basically traits means character which is inherited. Traits means character which is inherited. Now what is inherited? Inherited means what? Which is passed from one generation to another, that we call inherited. So genetic characteristics are the characters which are inherited from our parents, right? So this is all about genetic diversity. So if we talk about genetic diversity, it is basically the different genes and combinations of genes that exist within the population, right? And genetic diversity refers to the total number of genetic characteristics in the genetic makeup of species, right? Genetic characteristics basically deals with the traits that we inherit from our parents, right? Coming to genetic variations, how will you measure the genetic variations? Genetic variations are measured by studying the DNA based techniques. if you want to study genetic variations, you have to know about the DNA based techniques, and we will not go into that techniques because this is completely from the biological part, right? So only one thing you need to know, that how it is measured. It is measured by DNA based techniques, right? Now, cheetahs are threatened species. We all know this, right? Threatened means what? That is about to exist. Very less number of individuals, about to extinct. That is what we call cheetahs. Cheetahs are threatened species. That is what we call you threatened. Low genetic diversity results in poor sperm quality. If the genetic diversity is less, it results in poor sperm quality and has made breeding and survivorship difficult for cheetah. Did you get the point? So what exactly is happening? Genetic variations are basically used for studying the genetic variations are basically measured by studying the DNA based techniques, right? Cheetahs are threatened species that is about to extinct. Now why this is happening? Why they are extinct species? This is because the low genetic diversity, their genetic diversity is very less, right? So which results in poor sperm quality and has made breeding and survivorship difficult for cheetahs, right? Okay, so let's okay, species diversity. Species diversity refers to number of species that are represented in a given community, right? It refers to number of species that are present in a community. So this is a community A. Whatever the types of species present here, that we call species diversity. Not only the number of species but also the relationship they shares, right? This is what also we call species diversity. Clear everyone? What is species diversity? Right? Different kind of organisms and relationships among species. This we considered as species diversity. The degree of species diversity in an area. How can you define the degree of species diversity? How can you measure the species diversity? We can measure the species diversity by counting the number of species in that area. Right? Now how will you count? You will count. Species diversity can be counted by two methods, right? Species diversity can be counted by two methods, that is your species evenness and species richness. Species richness and second is species evenness. Now, what are these species richness and species evenness, right? We will see this. This is species richness, species evenness, right? Suppose this is a forest 1 and this is a forest 2, right? And if I draw the number of species here, this is species A, species B, species C, right? Species A like this, species B like this, and species C like this. But if I draw forest 2, this is species A, species B, species C, and species D. Here you can see 4 different types of species are there, right? So now here more number of species is there, right? Here you can see that only species A, B, C, but here A, B, C, D. So here number of species is more. Yes, number of species is more compared to your forest 1, right? So we call that the species richness is more in case of forest 2. So what we conclude is species richness is more in forest 2, right? But if we see the forest 1, you can see all are present. A little variations is there in their quantity, right? All are, this means only this much difference. Though there are 3 types of species, but if you count the number of individuals, there is not much variations like in this graph, right? So this is so much variations. Here a little bit. So we call that forest 1 is more evenness than forest 2, right? So evenness means actually the number of organism of each species, right? And when we talk about species richness, that means the variety of species that survive or that are present in that particular area, right? So that is what about the species richness and species evenness. So in exam you can get questions like how species diversity can be measured, right? So for 1 marks you have to, if it is given option, go for these two options, both A and B will be there, right? And if option is not there, you have to write species diversity can be measured with the help of species richness and species evenness. That's all. What's so big deal? Yes. So that is all about the species diversity. Next we will see ecological diversity. Okay, ecosystem diversity or ecological diversity, this is very interesting because here we talk about the different kind of habitats. Ecosystem diversity basically defines the different habitat, niches, species interaction. Niches is basically a part of the habitat. Suppose this is a habitat, right? Now in this particular part of habitat we call it niches. For example, if I compare it with an analogy, when you stays in a hostel room, see this is a hostel room, right? Now in this hostel room, say it is a two-seaters, right? So what exactly happened out of this entire room, your bed is suppose this one, right? So you are functional in this part only, so this is called niche. Clear? So ecosystem or ecological diversity actually defines about the different habitat, niches, and the interaction of the species, how the species interact, right? Clear everyone? Yes. Next, ecosystem diversity refers to the variety of ecosystem in a given place. It also refers to a variety of ecosystem that exist within that place. Ecosystem include not only plants, animals and microbes that coexist at a place, but also the way in which they interact with each other. That means what? It not only the ecological diversity not only describes the number of plant, animal, microbes that coexist, but also the way of interaction in the environment, how they interact with other kind of species, other kind of living organism, that also is included in the ecosystem diversity. Clear everyone? Yes. So what we have learned today, if I go for a quick revision of what we have learned today, we have seen today, quick revision of what we have learned today of our class is that I'm compiling everything in one page so that it is for you easy for you to understand. We have seen about biodiversity. Biodiversity is basically the variations in biodiversity is what? Basically, it's a variations in the number of living organism. Variations in the, just a second. Variations in the number of living organisms. Right? Next, we have seen the term biodiversity was given by Raymond F. Desmond, right? Apart from this, we have seen the levels of biodiversity. If we talk about levels of biodiversity, there are basically three levels. What are the three levels? That is your genetic diversity, yes, species diversity, and your ecosystem diversity, right? If I talk about genetic diversity, it refers to the different gene and combination of gene. Different gene and combination of gene. Different gene and combination of genes, right? If we talk about species diversity, it describes about different kind of what? Organism and relationship among organism. Different kind of organism and their relationship, right? That is what we have seen, right? Ecosystem diversity basically defines the different habitat niches, different habitat niches Then species interaction. Species interaction, right? So this is what we have seen. Genetic diversity, basically we measure genetic diversity with the help of DNA based techniques. DNA based techniques we use for measuring the genetic diversity. For species diversity, it is measured with the help of two process, that is your species richness and species evenness, right? This only we have discussed today. Yes, okay, so that's all. Next class we'll be doing with the biogeographic zones of India. If you have any doubt, please feel free to ask me. Thank you so much, students.